What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to let you guys know that today's video is going to be a compilation of old stories. I'm not really feeling very well today, and so I wasn't able to get a recording done on time because my nose keeps stuffing up and my voice keeps cracking and stuff, so I hope you guys will still enjoy this best of compilation anyway. I'll try to still get the mega mix out tomorrow if I can. If you guys are enjoying these daily videos and you would like to support the channel, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, as all of that goes a long way to make sure I can keep making these videos for a long time to come. Without further ado though guys, I will let you enjoy the next however long of scary stories, and I'll see you again at the end of the video. Strap in, this is a decently long one. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and this story is about a 33-year-old man. Let's call him Greg. I met him at the gym about a year back or so. I used to go to the gym with my mother, and being an introvert, I very seldom used to engage with or even talk to people. Being in the gym since the last 2 years, I had seen Greg work out and never really caught him staring or even looking in my direction. He was a well-educated, well-spoken man, and I assumed that interacting with him would not pose any threat to me. One day, Greg just randomly walked up to me at the gym and asked to add me on Facebook so he could promote some things regarding his business. I didn't really think much of it, as I'm barely active on the platform anyway. I let him add me. Slowly, our interactions grew in the gym, as well as on social media. I was going through a rough patch, so I would often find myself looking for a friend or perhaps even more. From the very beginning, my mother did not seem to like Greg. She felt that something was off about him. Regardless, I chose to meet him and another mutual friend of ours from the gym for coffee. I wasn't romantically inclined towards Greg, but I wasn't totally opposed to it either. At coffee, our conversations were quite general. But on text, Greg would casually flirt with me a lot. I would just ignore it, but that turned out to be a big mistake. The more I spoke to Greg and the more I found out about him, the more I realized I didn't see any kind of future with him in it, not even as a friend. Eventually, I started backing off, and took longer and longer to reply to his messages. I didn't want to blatantly confront him. After all, we did go to the same gym, and I wanted to avoid any hostility. Greg also slowly backed off as well, and we stopped talking altogether. Fast forward 6 months. I got my dream job and posted about it on Facebook. Greg congratulated me and told me he was proud of me. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and started replying to his texts again. He immediately began making flirtatious remarks toward me, but this time I told him flat out that made me uncomfortable, and I didn't want to be involved with him romantically or sexually. Subsequently, the conversations died down, and we parted on what I thought were cordial terms. He would often send me messages asking for feedback on some of his work, but I would generally ignore them. Now, in July of this year, Greg messaged me once more, asking for some feedback. He also sent another message asking whether I would like to withdraw from his broadcast list. I respectfully told him I would like to withdraw, since I didn't think I was qualified enough to give him appropriate feedback anyway. He went completely off on me, sending a bunch of messages, most of which I did not understand. I asked for context, and he told me I was only getting that over a call. I agreed. Another mistake. We spoke for 2 hours, wherein I made it very clear that he was only a friend and nothing more. He agreed and was very respectful throughout. Because of that, I assumed there was no harm in simply talking to him. For a couple of weeks, we spoke as friends before he started proposing me being a future work partner for a music venture. I was hesitant and would shoot his invitations to meet down by making various excuses. After about 3 weeks of this, he began making sexual remarks toward me. It made me uncomfortable, and I told him that I didn't want to talk to him anymore since we weren't on the same page. He started to get angry. He told me that if I wouldn't meet him, he didn't want to talk to me anymore either. I thought to myself, good riddance. I was getting increasingly tired of him calling me throughout the day and talking always about his inflated self-image. He told me something like he'd contact me after a year and we could meet then if I reconsidered my feelings toward him. I was growing impatient. I just wanted him out of my life. I was off my phone the next day for 6 to 7 hours. When I came back, I was welcomed to numerous missed calls and messages, most of which were threatening in nature. He threatened to show up to my house and kill me and my family. This is when I realized I may need to involve my family and the police. I told my parents everything. They didn't immediately contact the police, though. These could just be empty threats from a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. The following day, Greg got my parents' numbers and started sending them threatening messages, claiming he would abduct me if they didn't make me marry him. We contacted the police. They went straight to Greg's home to investigate. But seeing his behavior, out on the roof half naked, screaming at the sky, they declared him mentally unfit and told us he could not be arrested. We withdrew the complaint and contacted higher law authorities. Whilst we were awaiting a response, Greg allegedly committed a crime in a 5-star hotel. He attacked a female employee and a guest with a knife and tried to rape the employee. Consequently, an FIR was filed, which led to Greg being admitted to a mental institution. He stayed there for a couple of days and now walks completely free. We were able to file another complaint against him, which was taken more seriously this time. However, we were advised not to create a case, as he would easily get off on bail. So he still roams free and still continues to contact me from unknown numbers every once in a while, making me feel like I'm under constant threat whenever I'm outside my house. Okay, so buckle up because this is going to get weird. This isn't something unknown amongst my friends and the people local to me, as I live in quite a small town. In grade 5, I would have been about 13 or 14, and I had no friends. I was and still am kind of weird, and it tended to throw people off. Making friends in high school was so difficult for me, because I refused to change who I was just to fit in. During the second week of school, I met George in my English class. Our teacher had sat us together, and we had begun talking and building a friendship. George seemed very nice, and we had a lot in common as well. He had come from a different elementary school. It was odd because people from his area commonly went to a different high school, although he insisted he wanted to go to this one because there were certain classes he wanted to take that the other school didn't offer. After about a week of talking together during English, he asked if I wanted to eat lunch with him. We had the same lunch period, and he said he noticed how often I sat alone. I thought it was the nicest gesture, so I agreed. We ended up having lunch together for a while, but then I started making some new friends. I always invited him to eat lunch with a few of the friends I had made, but he always declined. Then, one day in English, he passed me a note. This was very strange since we were sitting right next to each other. It said something like, "I need to talk to you. Can we please sit alone together for lunch?" I wrote back I would sit down with him, and we hardly spoke for the rest of the period. I started getting really weird vibes from him. So, lunchtime rolled around. I saw him sitting at the end of a row. I go to sit down and he says, "No, let's go outside to talk." I agreed. He looked really upset. I wanted to know what was going on. When we got outside, he led me over to sit on a curb in front of the school and started talking very aggressively. He told me it was unfair of me to make other friends when he was the one who'd befriended me first. He told me I had to eat lunch with him because when I was alone, he ate lunch with me. Now that he was alone, I was obligated to do the same. It was a very bizarre conversation. I explained that he could sit with me and my friends, and that way there would be no issues. He could even make some new friends himself. I had enough friendship to spread around, and he had nothing to be upset about. What he said next completely shocked me. I could see the anger in his eyes. He grabbed my arm real hard. "I don't think you understand. You owe me this. You will sit with me." I got freaked out at that point and told him we could sit alone together every other day. I just wanted to get away from him and go back inside where more people were around. After that day, I started getting these weird messages in my email. I'll never forget the first one. All it said was, "All women are Satan. The devil lives in all of you." I didn't recognize the address and assumed it was some internet troll trying to scare me. Then they started coming more frequently, all with the same type of message. I started getting scared, so I showed my friends these emails. They agreed that it was weird, but also agreed it was probably some random person just trying to scare people. One of my friends, though, told me that she thought it was George. She had heard some stories about why he'd come to our school instead of going to the other one. She told me he was so obsessed with one of the girls in his class that her mom had to get a restraining order against him over the summer. I told her that sounded insane, and I didn't believe it. I was having lunch with George on alternate days, and we were still friendly during English class, but I was trying to distance myself from him. After Christmas break, our schedules changed for second semester. I was very happy about this, because I knew I'd have a different lunch period and we wouldn't have English together anymore. I could slowly disassociate myself from him. I was wrong. He started leaving notes in my locker, confessing his undying love and explaining that we were meant to take over the world together. The feelings were very much not mutual. I had to tell him that enough was enough. I explained he was overwhelming me and I needed space from our friendship. He seemed to understand. He didn't get upset or yell. He just agreed to give me my space. In the meantime, the emails started getting much worse. They started threatening my life, telling me they knew where I lived and went to school. I went straight to my mom when this started happening. My mom called the police. The police informed the school. The school looked up the email in their records and found out it was indeed George sending those emails all along. He was suspended and wouldn't even look at me after. I was honestly so relieved. 1 year after we graduated high school, George and his mother went out for a drive. While she was driving, he stabbed her over 100 times. When the police found him, he tried saying it was a car accident, but when they questioned him further about all the stab wounds, he admitted to killing her. He claimed he was trying to release the devil from his mother's soul. He pleaded insanity and was found not criminally responsible for her murder. I worked for a packaging company at the central office, along with owner's eldest daughters who helped to run the company. I had worked there for over a year, and I really loved my job. Really nice people to work for. Things all changed, though, when a temp went in for his interview. I'll call him C. I would assist my manager with the interviews by sitting in and taking notes. When C walked in the interview room, my manager shook his hand and greeted him. As he was greeting her back, though, he kept staring at only me, which I found a bit odd. We said a quick hello/greeting as well, and the interview started. C got the job and was shown around the office, and would be starting the next day. The following day, work started off like always, busy but in a good way, nothing too hectic that I couldn't handle. C came into the office, and I, along with a coworker, showed him the inventory he'd be helping to care for, and introduced him to the rest of the crew and people he would be working with. We showed him the computer system, gave him instructions on how to do what he needed to do. Everything was going pretty well. He was polite, got straight to work, and my coworker and I went back to our areas. I felt like kind of a jerk for feeling the way I did the day before when I'd initially met him. At the end of the day, heading to my car, I was surprised to see C standing right next to it. I asked him if he needed something. He told me he wanted to apologize for the day before, all the staring. He didn't mean to be rude. I told him it was fine, no harm, no foul. He asked if he could make it up to me by taking me out to lunch tomorrow. I told him that although I did appreciate the offer, he didn't have to make up anything to me. Plus, since I was always busy at work, I normally eat at my desk anyway. That wasn't true, but the excuse seemed to work on him. A couple of weeks later, my coworker H, who I'm also good friends with, asked me what exactly was going on between C and I. I was confused as to what she was talking about. She told me that C was spreading all these rumors about me, that we were romantically involved and there was a lot of chemistry between us. Now I was really confused and freaked out. I didn't see how he could mistake me giving him the inventory list as flirting, seeing as how we barely even talked otherwise. That same day, apparently he became aware I knew what he was saying. That day I had to leave early, since I was going to watch my young niece who was sick, while my sister went to work. I was already stressed out about my sick niece, so I decided to put off dealing with him to the next day. About 2 hours after I got home, I was alone with my 5-year-old niece, when suddenly I heard the doorbell ring. I peeked out the window, only to see that C was outside. I told my niece to go lock herself in the bedroom and hide just in case. I opened the front door, the security door beyond that still being locked, and I proceeded to flip out on him. What made him think it was okay to show up to my home unannounced? He started telling me he wanted to explain himself. As he started telling me his BS story, I asked him how he even knew my address in the first place. He then got real quiet and really serious. He told me he was on his way home when he passed by my house and recognized my car. I called out his BS. My sister had taken my car since hers had a booster seat, and since I needed to help organize his employee file, I knew he didn't live anywhere near me at all. I told him he needed to leave right now. He started raising his voice, telling me I was hurting his feelings because I couldn't see how much he liked me, and how stupid I was to not see what a great catch he is. As he was insisting on talking to me, my brother-in-law pulled up into the driveway. Now, he was a big guy. Although he has a teddy bear heart, he can be very intimidating. C turned around and saw him there, and I could just see the color drain from his face immediately. He told C to scram, and I'd never seen someone take off that fast. I called my manager and told her what just happened. She told me not to worry. She'd tell the temp agency he was no longer allowed at my work. I didn't see him anywhere after that day. 2 days later, I got called into my manager's office. Apparently, she'd had a weird feeling when I called her and decided to review the security cameras. Turns out that on the day he was interviewed, he stayed outside the premises. He waited for about 6 hours, and he finally left after I was leaving for the day. That explains how he knew which vehicle was mine. He most likely followed me, and that's how he knew where I lived as well. For the past couple of years, I've had the same job. I'm a janitor for a popular fast food restaurant. I don't take orders or do anything at all aside from cleaning. I don't even see the other workers a lot of the time because I'm scheduled overnight. At the restaurant, everything needs to be deep cleaned every day, and during open hours, it's basically impossible to do so. I've never had anything happen during my shifts, aside from the occasional customer knocking on the window and asking if we're open. On this night, I came in and got to work like I usually did. A couple other employees were still there when I got there, but by 10 o'clock, which was about an hour after closing, it was just me for the rest of the night. I popped in my headphones and started scraping the grills and prepping everything that needed to be hosed down. After a while, I kinda lost track of time. My best guess is that it was sometime around 12 a.m. That's when I heard a knock at the front of the building. I pulled off my headphones and heard it once more. I walked over to the front, expecting someone at the door, checking to see if we were closed or not. But once I got over there and looked outward, nobody was there. I went up to the door and observed the parking lot as well. No cars or people to be seen. I knew I'd heard it from this side of the building, though. I waited to hear the sound again, but there was nothing. I ended up thinking that maybe I mistook another sound for knocking. I went back to doing my work. Another hour or so went by. I took a lunch break and grabbed my lunch bag. I sat down at one of the tables in the middle of the dining area. I was taking my time, since I was actually a bit ahead on my cleaning schedule. Once I finished eating, I went to the back and turned to grab the mop, only to see a man's face staring at me from outside the drive-thru window. He had messy hair and a blank expression, but his eyes had something strange about them. It was like they were completely empty. I froze up for a second, and after a moment, the man calmly turned and walked away. My heart was racing in my chest from surprise. I just stood there, listening to his departing footsteps into the darkness. I didn't exactly know what to think about this. It was just incredibly creepy and strange. Once I got my confidence back, I opened the window and looked outward to make sure he'd actually left. It was dark beyond the light of the restaurant, but I didn't see anyone. I closed it up and locked it. I was on edge for the next hour or so, constantly looking behind me at the windows, feeling like I was being watched from somewhere. As my shift was coming to an end, I started to finally feel some relief. The anxiety calmed down. One of the last few things I had to do was roll all the garbage bags out to the dumpster, which I had been avoiding doing for as long as I could. I checked out the window again before I stepped out. It looked clear. I quickly opened the door and tossed the garbage out. I started tossing them in one by one into the dumpster. Not even 20 seconds into this, though, the man suddenly appeared from just around the corner. I stopped what I was doing and quickly called out to ask the man what he needed. He didn't respond at all. He simply kept walking toward me. He had that same empty stare. Now I could see his whole body, though, and it was even more terrifying. He was an extremely large man, wearing a dirty and stained coat. Not knowing what else to do, I ran for the door and opened it. The man's footsteps rushed up behind me. As I slammed the door shut, the man stuck out his arm into the gap and prevented me from closing it. I turned and sprinted to the other end of the restaurant, getting my keys out and unlocking the front door as fast as I could. I heard the man closing the distance behind me. I barely got away again. I ran just as he was about to grab me. I sprinted across the parking lot as far as I could while calling the police. 5 minutes later, the police arrived. The man was long gone. We had the footage on the CCTV, but no identity could be made from it. It also showed that as soon as I ran away, the man just stood there and watched me for a bit, then left at the back door. What he wanted from me is unknown, but his creepy and objectively horrifying behavior gives me chills just thinking about it. Something scary happened when I went to visit my parents' new home. You might believe me, you might not, but this is the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I was a student studying in Tokyo, and it was summer break, so I headed back to Okayama, a rural area in Japan. It had been about a year since I'd last seen my parents, and since I'd gone off to university, they'd moved house. So this was all new to me when I came back. We used to live in a built-up area, but my parents had now moved out to the countryside. When I say countryside, I mean there was literally nothing around, except for forests and mountains. I got off the train and my parents met me at the station. They drove me back to their new place, which took about 40 minutes or so. There was nothing but rice fields and a few residential areas along the way. There was nothing to do after the initial buzz of homecoming passed, and I grew bored quite quickly. I decided to take a walk to get to know the area a bit better. I did manage to find a convenience store, which was good. I walked alongside a river and then found a mountain. There looked to be a mountain trail, and this mountain didn't look that big. I had some time to kill, so I thought, why not climb a bit? I've got nothing better to do. I parked my bike at the entrance and started walking up the mountain. Well, it wasn't really high enough to be called a mountain exactly, but it wasn't a hill either. It took about 30 minutes to get to the summit. At the summit, there was this little park. I reached that park just as the sun was going down. I felt a bit dumb. I was used to the bright night lights of Tokyo, so when it got dark, I was never really bothered by it. Thing is, I'd forgotten I was in the countryside now, and when it gets dark there, it gets real dark real quick. It was turning pitch black in no time. Pitch black with me stuck up on top of this mountain. I didn't like the sound of that so much. I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible, before the last remnants of the sunlight disappeared into darkness. Since it had taken me about 30 minutes to climb up the summit, I thought maybe I could make it back down in 20 or so if I hurried up. I was about to scramble down the mountain's side when I heard a voice call out to me. It was a woman's voice. That was weird. I hadn't noticed anyone in the park at the summit. "Where are you from?" she asked. No hello or excuse me? What's up with that? When I turned to face this voice, I saw a woman standing there, grinning like mad. It's getting dark. I better head back now," I said. She didn't say another word. She just stood there grinning at me. I didn't like that. What kind of person stands there on the top of the mountain and grins at you? The strangest thing was that although her mouth was smiling, her eyes weren't, if you know what I mean. It was like a fake smile. I can't describe the uncomfortable feeling when our eyes met for a few moments. I backed up a bit. I really gotta get going now. I started heading down the mountain as quickly as I could. I was a bit worried the woman would follow me, but when I looked over my shoulder and saw she wasn't there, I was a bit relieved. When I got back to my bike, it was now pitch black. I was just about to reach out and grab the handles when I heard a voice call from behind me. "What's your name?" I spun around in an instant, only to find that creepy woman standing right behind me, studying me with her eyes, smiling this robotic smile. I swear I'd looked over my shoulder a dozen times as I went down the mountain, so I had no idea how she'd managed to either evade my sight or get down here so quickly and silently. I was really panicking now. Something about this was not normal at all. I didn't reply, so she asked me again with the exact same intonation. I said a common name, of course, a pseudonym. She didn't say anything in response. She just kept staring at me and smiling. "Okay, well, I'm getting out of here now," I said, as I threw my legs over my bike and started pedaling as hard as I could without looking back. I wanted to try and calm down. My heart was racing. I pulled into the convenience store on the way home. I wanted to read a magazine or do something to distract myself. Afterwards, I went home with no further issue. I spoke to my mother about that encounter with the strange woman, but she didn't seem to believe me. She just laughed and said, "Oh, did you see a ghost or something?" I couldn't get that strange woman out of my head, though. The way she'd followed me, that horrible, insincere smile, it haunted me a lot more than I thought it would. I tried to think more logically about the situation. Maybe she was a local to the area. Probably she knew a shortcut down the mountain, and that's how she was able to pop up behind me so easily. Since she was a local, she probably knew everyone in town, and that's why she asked me my name, right? And where I was from? Perhaps she wasn't as creepy as I'd made her out to be in my mind, but something still felt off about this. I always trust my gut in these situations. I hung around my parents' home for about a week longer, then decided to head back to Tokyo. I was waiting to get on the bullet train when my heart sunk. I saw that same woman from the mountaintop, just on the other side of the tracks. She was wearing the exact same outfit as the night I'd seen her, only one thing was different. She wasn't smiling this time. There was absolutely no sense of expression on her face at all. She didn't realize I'd noticed her at first, but when she saw I was looking her way, she locked eyes with me, and that insane grin crept across her face immediately. It looked as if she was trying to say something to me, but I couldn't hear or make out what it was. She broke into a full-on sprint toward the station stairs in an attempt to get to my side of the tracks. She was barreling right toward me. When the train finally pulled in, I jumped on board and headed down the aisles, knocking into many people and barging them aside in an attempt to find a place to hide. I was terrified the whole journey back. I felt for sure she was on the train somewhere. In fact, I'm not entirely certain she wasn't. I got back to my home in Tokyo yesterday. I really hope I'll never see that woman again, but I can't get that creepy smile out of my head. It was Friday night back in 2018. I was working at home on a paper I needed to finish for work and was trying to get it done so I could enjoy my weekend. I didn't want to have to worry about it anymore. It was probably somewhere around 10 p.m. or so at this point. I'd been working in my office for a good 3 hours now, and this was after a full day already too. I was getting pretty exhausted. I kept finding myself getting distracted or losing focus. I paused what I was doing and stood up to stretch my legs and try to wake myself up a bit. I paced around the room, but as I passed by the wall opposite my desk, I noticed some movement in the window. I stopped and did a double take, looking out the window again. I was on the second story of my home, but the window had a view of the front portion of the property, just by the garage and porch. At first, I didn't really see anything. I thought my mind must have been playing tricks on me. But then I saw that tiny bit of movement yet again. There was a shadow hovering over the sidewalk leading up to the porch. It seemed someone was standing outside my front door, or at least that's what it looked like from here. After continuing to look out the window for a couple of minutes and seeing the shadow barely move at all, I left my office and went downstairs. I leaned on the front door and checked out the peephole. There was a man outside, looking to be about 40 years old. He was bald, with a big scruffy gray beard. I watched for a moment, but he never knocked nor rang the doorbell. In fact, he wasn't making any noise at all. He was just standing there outside my front door. What started freaking me out more, though, was that I had no idea how long he'd been out there. I had been working the whole time, and I'd never noticed him until just a couple of minutes ago. Wanting some answers as to why the man was here, I opened the door. Immediately I was taken aback because the man didn't even flinch at all. His face stayed the exact same, cold and lacking emotion. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I said in a stern tone. The man just continued to stare, but didn't answer. His eyes had this 1,000-yard stare until they moved past me and looked down the hallway into my home. I moved the door further in toward my body to hide the view. I don't know why you're here, but you need to leave right now. I closed the door firmly in his face. His strange behavior was both creepy and aggravating. Him ignoring me, just standing there and staring off into space, made me really weirded out. I then heard his footsteps begin walking off the porch and away from the house. I sighed in relief and checked to make sure he'd really gone away. I then went back up to my office, trying to forget about that strange man and focus back on my work once more. I continued where I left off, when about 5 minutes later, just as I was really beginning to get into it, a sudden knock echoed through the house. It was coming from the front door, but the knocks were quite loud, like someone was banging on it with their whole fist. Irritated, I got up and quickly ran down to the front door, swinging it open aggressively with the intent to yell at the man. When I saw him, I quickly changed my mind though. Something about the look in his eyes and the way he was standing instantly shifted my anger into fear. I looked down to his hands, seeing him holding something against his side, as if trying to conceal it from me. All I could make out was the top of a small handle, resembling that of a knife. I looked back up at him, only to see his whole body jolt toward me. I jumped back and slammed the door shut. I then fought to lock it, as the man began to try and force his way in from the other side. Once I got the handle and deadbolt latched, the man started banging on the door again, before eventually running away. I stood there with barely any breath in me, feeling my adrenaline surging through my body. Shakily, I went to the office and called 911. I never saw the man again after that, and no real answers as to what happened that night were ever discovered. Last winter, I went on a trip to see a few friends from college. The drive over was 18 hours, so I did it in 2 9-ish hour sections, staying at an Airbnb on the way. It was the same thing on the way back too, but I'd booked a different Airbnb just for fun. I guess I thought it would be nice to see some different areas and whatnot. Anyway, a bit of heavy snow had caused some delays, and I didn't arrive in town until 9 p.m. It was a very small area, which I was already aware of because there were pretty much no big towns or cities at the halfway point of this 18-hour drive. The last Airbnb had been in a small town as well, but this one was noticeably much smaller. A few stores bordered the road, but all the houses were either on farms or super far apart from each other. When I got to my Airbnb, it was no different. It was super far from the other houses. However, the outside was somewhat modernized. It clearly had some cabin-style features, but it almost looked out of place compared to all the other houses in the area. I parked on the gravel driveway and went up to the door, putting in the code and going inside the house. I'd seen the pictures of the inside online, and it looked to be about the same. I went around and checked all the rooms, then put my things in the bedroom. I then went down to the couch. As soon as I sat down and picked up the TV remote, I began to hear a tapping noise coming from right behind me. I quickly turned my head around and saw a woman standing outside the window, tapping on the glass. Her hair was unkempt and long, and she had a crazy sort of look in her eyes. Once she got my attention, though, she pointed toward the front door and walked away from the window. I got up with my heart racing from the unexpectedness of this all. I made my way over to the door, knowing it was probably just some old lady. I didn't exactly feel scared. but I wasn't feeling safe either, if that makes any sense. I cracked the door open just enough to talk to her. The woman smiled and said she needed some assistance. I waited for a moment for her to explain what was going on. But after a while, she still hadn't said anything. I asked what exactly she needed help with. She looked behind herself, saying she had lost something in the road just outside the house. I looked out there, not being able to see anything past the low lights of the Airbnb. "I'm not really sure if I can help you with that," I said. Her smile immediately left her face, and then she repeated herself like a robot. The entire thing, too, word for word about her losing something out on the road. "Yeah, I know, but I don't think I can help. I'm sorry," I said. I closed the door and waited for a minute until I could hear her leave, then went back to the couch. I wasn't sure if she was just some crazy old lady, or if there was something more nefarious going on, but it was very strange. I relaxed a bit and turned on the TV, watching some shows until 11 p.m. At that point, I got tired and climbed into bed. I think I still felt a bit uncomfortable though, because I found it very hard to fall asleep. All I remember is laying in bed restless for a whole hour. I was abruptly woken up sometime in the middle of the night to a sound coming from the front of the house. It was quiet, but with the rest of the house being completely silent, it really stood out. My mind immediately went to that woman from earlier. I got up from the bed and nervously walked down the hallway, then looked at where I was hearing this from, the front door. I rushed over to stop them, but the door had opened just as I got my body against it. I pressed all my weight into the door, as whoever was on the other side seemed to try and do the same. I'm a pretty big guy, so whoever was out there must have had a fair deal of strength. For a moment, it felt like they might actually overpower me and force the door open. They gave up after a few seconds of pushing, though, and sprinted down the driveway. I locked the door and ran to the window, trying to get a good view of who was out there, but they were already past the line of light. I thought through my options for a second, then ran to grab my things from my bedroom and went out to my car. I drove away. I didn't want to be at that house any longer. I knew police in a small town like that wouldn't be helpful at all. I don't know who was behind that door, but I'm sure they had to have been associated with the woman from earlier that night. If I had went out to help her, or if I had woken up even a moment later, I don't think I would have been seen again after that night. I was bored one day, so I decided to Google my own name. A bit dumb, really, but hey, we've all done that, haven't we? I found a bunch of pages with my full name on them, maybe 10 or so. It was mainly LinkedIn pages or Facebook profiles, and people with totally different lives to mine, who just so happened to have the same name. Then, though, at the very bottom, I found a mysterious blog. It was called My Full Name's Page. It was a very simple blog page, and didn't look professionally made either, just a private blog type of thing, maybe like a diary or something. It was quite interesting. The person who seemed to be running this blog was about the same age as me, and had the same interests and hobbies as me as well. As I scrolled through this blog, I noticed there were 5 or 6 regular commenters. Nothing special at all. Yet somehow I found myself checking in on this blog from time to time. I was watching for new content. It was kind of like getting full access to someone's diary. One post caught my attention though. It said something like this: it was a hot one today, but it was a great day to watch soccer and see Japan win. It was something like that. I can't exactly remember the wording. What was striking, though, was the fact that it was very similar to what I'd done that day. I'd basically stayed home and watched soccer all day. The admin of the blog must have been in the stadium, of course. I chalked it up to a coincidence, and nothing more at the time. After all, watching soccer is not too specific. That was a very bad move on my part, though. The next day, I checked the blog again. It had another post. Having a bad day today. I made a mistake at work. It was very odd now. I was down that day because I'd made a mistake at work too. Day after day after day, I kept checking that blog, and I kept noticing more and more coincidences and similarities between me and the author, or whoever the admin was. It was like reading a blog about my own life. There was another weird post one day. After work, I bought a CD and ate some curry for dinner in a restaurant. Pretty classic, huh? Okay, now I knew this couldn't be a coincidence, because that's exactly what I did that day. As the days turned to weeks, I started to get paranoid. The owner of the blog began receiving birthday wishes from the few who regularly commented, and yeah, as you might have guessed, they had the same birthday as me. I really should have taken that as a sign to quit looking at that blog, or at least try to do something about it. Instead, my curiosity really got the best of me. I decided to comment myself using a pseudonym. When I went to write, though, I realized that this was a bulletin board, a page that you can't interact with. I didn't understand how the page was having comments then. It was so weird. I wanted to find out what exactly this page was supposed to be about. It was so eerie. I sent an email to the admin. Hey, nice to meet you. I have the same name as you, and I often visit this site. It was a pretty bland email. The next day, I decided to check on that page. I was surprised to find that it had suddenly been deleted. That was pretty creepy. I then went to check my emails. I'd gotten a reply from the admin. All the page said was, "Looks like I found ya." I got the hell out of my apartment and started staying with a friend. I'm thinking about moving soon, and I'll post more if anything else happens. I hope this is all just a prank or something. Last year, my roommate moved out of the house. We had been renting together for the past 4 years. By then, both of us had gotten better jobs and were getting paid much more. The house we lived in wasn't the best, so it was only a matter of time before one of us moved out to get their own place. After he moved, though, I was able to use more of the space in the house, and actually just decided to stay there for another year or two. This happened during that time, sometime in early December. Our area was going through a week of some pretty bad snowstorms, and the office I worked at allowed us to work from home for a few days, if we wanted to. Obviously, I chose to take them up on that offer. I used my old roommate's bedroom as an office, and worked all throughout the day. At one point while I was working, though, there was a knock at the front door. I left the room to check who this was. There was a man on the porch in a heavy winter jacket. He didn't seem to be a worker or a delivery person of any kind, just some regular old Joe. I opened the door, getting hit by a rush of snow and wind. Yeah? How can I help you?" The man smiled and apologized for interrupting my day. He explained his situation. He said his car had gotten stuck in the snow right on the side of the road next to my house, and he didn't have a phone on him. He asked if he could borrow mine to call someone for help. Obviously skeptical, I told him to give me a moment. I then closed my door and went to the other side of the house. I looked out the window at the road he was supposedly stuck on. There was a small SUV out there that looked like it had slidden on some ice onto the curb and gotten stuck in the snowbank. Now that I was pretty sure he was not lying about that, I grabbed a jacket and put on some shoes. Then I went back to the front door. I was still a bit skeptical, of course, but I stood on the porch with him as he used my phone to call his brother, just so that if he tried to run with it or anything, I could chase after him and prevent him from leaving. After a quick call, the man simply handed my phone back and thanked me, then walked away. I went inside and checked out the window, seeing the man getting in his car. Thinking everything had been settled and resolved quite peacefully, I went back to the office and started working again. Around 7 o'clock or so, I felt like I'd done enough for the day and took the rest of the night off. It was then that I remembered about that man in his car from earlier. I went to check and see if he'd gotten the help he needed, and was surprised to find that car was still there. I could see the man moving around inside of it. It had been almost 3 hours by then, which made me wonder how he was still stuck there. Maybe he was waiting for his brother to get off work and pick him up or something? I didn't know. I went to the kitchen and made some dinner, then sat down on the couch to watch some TV. I stayed up until about 9:30, then went upstairs to shower and get ready for bed. I turned the water on and hopped in the shower, but after a few minutes, there was a sudden and abrupt banging on the front door. It was loud and harsh, and completely jump-scared me. I was put into a fear-induced frozen state for a moment. The banging was so hard it was actually shaking the walls. Even across the entire house, I could still hear that it was coming from the front door. They were hitting it non-stop. I could even hear them aggressively shaking the door handle. It was such a sudden burst of chaos that I wasn't sure what to make of it. I turned off the shower and quickly got dressed, but as I left my room and walked down the hallway, everything stopped altogether. It was now completely silent. No more sounds at all. I stopped in place, hearing only the wind from outside, and feeling a bit of eeriness set in. I slowly walked downstairs and up to the front door. Nobody was there anymore. I quickly ran to the window and saw that car was still there. The man was no longer inside of it, though. Not knowing what was going on, I simply decided to call the police. When they came, they noticed multiple sets of shoe prints in the snow, but they were covered up by the storm soon after. They took the license plate of the car, though, and found a picture of the owner. From what I could tell, it was the same guy I'd helped on my porch. In the following days, they waited for him to return, but as far as I know, he never did. It's really disturbing to think about what could have happened that night right outside my door. Was it that same man desperately trying to get in for some reason? Or was it someone with malicious intent? It seems that most people I've told this story, including the police, think the man was running from someone and trying to get help. But what happened afterwards is very much up for debate. Nothing is really known about where that man is now, or what he was running from. They're just a few questions on a long list that will probably never be answered. I had bought my first house in my early 20s and lived all alone. I was content and at peace living alone, and decided to buy a house out in the country as opposed to an urban setting like my apartment had been located in. I had a few neighbors, but most of them kept to themselves, and I did too. The house was a ranch-style home, which meant there was no second floor, only a basement and first floor. The master bedroom was on the back side of the house, looking straight into the small backyard. Then there was nothing but woods beyond that. Since the basement was underground, the outside entry door had what was referred to as a bilko door, which is composed of 2 steel doors that swing out to each side, then a set of steps taking you down to a standard-sized entry door into the basement of the home. I normally don't keep those bilko exterior doors locked, especially in the summertime, just in case I need to get into the basement from the backyard. During the winter, though, I don't really need to get in or out of the basement, so I lock those doors up. Sometimes even in the fall as well. The first 2 years there were quiet, peaceful, and enjoyable. I could walk out my back door and go hunting in the woods just behind my house. I would get up in the mornings on days off and just open my garage door from sunrise to sunset with no issues at all. No one was coming around uninvited or anything. I worked a rotating 12-hour day/night shift schedule, which was brutal to get used to. I often had a lot of trouble switching from night shift to day shift, either sleeping too much or not enough. The work schedule repeated itself in a pattern, though, so it was nice to at least plan days off in advance. One particular night in December, I had just finished my 3 work days of night shift. It was hard trying to fall asleep at night on that first night off, but it was essential to get my body back to sleeping at night again, to change back to the day shift work schedule, which I needed for the following 3 days. This first transition night, I would typically sleep very lightly. It had been snowing outside since dark, which was around 5 p.m. or so. There were a few inches already on the ground by the time I'd went to bed. That was around 11 p.m. I fell asleep within the hour. I woke up at around 3 o'clock. The house was dead silent. I laid there in the complete darkness, hoping I would just drift right back to sleep soon. But after 2 to 3 minutes, I heard a violent banging right outside my bedroom window. I recognized that sound. Someone was trying to open the locked basement Bilco doors. I jumped out of bed and ran down the long hallway to the opposite end of the house, where the rear sliding glass door was. The outside floodlights switched on. I switched on the actual lights as well, and looked out the sliding glass door toward the basement doors. There wasn't anybody there. I looked a bit closer. I could see fresh footprint tracks in the snow, coming from the small path in the woods, leading right up to the basement doors. There was no snow on the handle either, indicating someone had just tried to open them. I saw a second set of footprints, leading away from the basement doors with a rooster tail, indicating someone had run as fast as they could away from my house. I stayed awake until almost dawn, leaving the lights turned on to the back side of the home. I decided to follow those tracks into the woods at daybreak, but the newly fallen snow and blowing wind had covered them up completely. After I made it a few feet into the woods, I concluded that whoever was trying to break in had probably heard me waking up and moving down the hallway inside the house. They'd run off into the woods before I was able to get to the sliding glass door and turn on the lights. I decided not to call the police, since nothing was damaged or stolen. From that day on, though, I made sure to keep all the doors locked and no longer left the garage door open all day. After all, nobody else was supposed to be around this area at that time. Yet there they were nonetheless. I later sold the house without any further incidents occurring since that one particular event. This happened when I was at high school. I was pretty young and got into a car accident as I was on the way to school. The car was pulling out of a car park just as I was about to cross the road. I waited, the driver also paused, and we were both still. The driver then did the usual gesture of go ahead with his hand and allowed me to go ahead and cross the road. Well, I started to walk across the road and raised my hand to thank the driver. At that point, the car pulled forward and knocked me right off my bike. I remember sitting up in the road in a complete daze. I stared down at my legs as they were bleeding. For some reason, I just shouted, "It's an accident!" The driver came rushing out of his car. As he crouched down by my side, he said in a very monotonous voice, "Are you all right? Can you still make it to school?" I was confused. I wanted to get away from this guy. Something felt weird about him. I said, yeah, I could still make it. As soon as I replied to him, he swiftly walked back to his car and pulled away. I ended up going to school that day, and when I told my friends about what happened, they were so surprised. Hey man, go and see the school nurse, you're bleeding and bruised. My friends were very concerned. Well, I took this friend's advice and went to go see the nurse. I didn't know the name of the guy who'd hit me. I didn't know how often he used that parking spot, and I hadn't really gotten a good look at him either. I doubted I would be able to find him. It was frustrating when I couldn't answer any of the nurse's questions. My wounds healed up, and about a half a year passed by. I was initially very suspicious every time I crossed a road, but I slowly grew less wary. That was until I was crossing the road at the very same parking lot on my bike again, and the exact same thing happened. Moreover, it was the same driver. This time he hit me so hard I was launched into the road, and my bike flew even further. Again, the driver got out of the car and slowly walked over to me. Can you still make it to school? He didn't even wait for my response this time. He just got back in his car, drove around my bike, and fled from the scene. I felt so helpless. I was only 14 years old, and here was this fully grown adult running me over for no reason. It was horrible. I couldn't do anything. This last time, I went to see the school nurse. I changed the route I walked to school. I didn't want to go past that car park again. There was another incident in the same parking lot it happened in too. A kid a few grades below mine. He was hit by a car pulling out of the parking lot. According to the kid's friends at school, the driver got out of the car and asked the kid if he could still make it to school. At this point, I knew this was more than just a coincidence. This was malicious and intentional. I was sure of it. Another incident happened soon after. This time, a kid was hit by a car. The kid didn't get up, but a passerby who witnessed the crash rushed him to the hospital, thankfully. He was able to survive. The passerby took down the driver's number plate. The driver was arrested. It was really great to know this guy wouldn't be driving around there anymore. They had an assembly about it at school, asking for any of the other victims to come forward. So I did. I was interviewed by the police. They confirmed what I already knew. I had been hit by the same guy both times, and so had the other kids. We weren't the only victims either. The man offered no explanation as to why he did this. Maybe he had a private grudge against students or our school. Maybe he just wanted to test how hard a student could get hit by his car and still recover. I guess I'll never know. I'm still very conscious of these events, though. That man was a complete psycho, running over people on purpose and leaving them in the street, especially doing this to children. I used to get freaked out by ghosts, but now I'm terrified of humans instead. I know this guy who moved to Tokyo when he was about 30. I worked with him. He was a part-time worker. One night, I was around his place. He was hosting a drinking party. We were chatting about his past and why he decided to pack up everything and move out to Tokyo. Well, he kind of avoided the question, but I kept on asking him. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Don't ask." I didn't get what the big deal was, so I kept on insisting. We kept on drinking, and I guess eventually the booze loosened his tongue. He told me this creepy little story about his past. After graduating from university, he got himself what he called a normal job in his hometown. He was still living with his parents at the time. One evening, he'd finished up work a little earlier than usual. He was walking home from the station when he saw a woman approaching. She came rushing right up to him. Hey, long time no see," she called out cheerfully. "How are you?" She was making out like they were the closest of friends or something, but he had never seen this woman before as far as he could tell. He wondered if maybe she could be an old friend he'd forgotten or something. It would have felt rude just to outright ask her who she was, so he pretended to go along with it. "Oh, yeah, long time. I'm doing well. How are you doing?" The woman stood there smiling at him. Then she plunged her hands into a handbag and pulled out a small navy blue notebook. He caught a glimpse of the front of the book in gold letters. It was a disabled person's notebook, it said. He was surprised because he couldn't see any physical sign of disability in this woman. He asked her about it. "Oh, what's this?" "Here, take a look." There was a photo of the woman, and right next to her photo it stated she was mentally ill. When he saw the name written in the book, he remembered who she was. When he was in high school and a little more immature, he used to bully this woman a bit. Her name was Michio. Now she was in front of him smiling. He faked a smile back at her. "Don't you remember me? That's a real shame. For the last 10 years, I haven't been able to forget about you. Don't worry, that's okay. You know this notebook here? It protects me. If I killed someone, how much trouble do you think I would get in? I'm sure that the media and police would wonder, but they wouldn't get that involved once they saw this book. It says that I'm mentally ill. I wouldn't even get prison time or the death penalty. Trust me, I've looked into it. It's not hard to get yourself a little book like this, if you know the right people. Did you know that? You know, I really didn't expect to run into you today. I didn't even bring my tools with me. I have big plans for you, you know. I could never take you on, though, if you knew it was coming, so I guess today's your lucky day. I'm not gonna kill you today, but another day. Who knows?" She stood there smiling and did a cute wave. She turned her back and left. He said he couldn't move. He was so shocked she had just said all that right to his face. She was smiling, but her eyes were crazed. He knew she meant exactly what she said. If she did have her tools on her that day, she would have killed him instead of ever speaking to him at all. After that encounter, needless to say, he was terrified she would come for him. He was still living with his parents, so it wouldn't have been too hard for her to turn up to his house in the middle of the night. He was scared to sleep. He was scared of what might happen to his folks. He knew he had to leave town right now. He packed up his things and headed for Tokyo. He told his parents not to tell anyone where he was going. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to justify bullying, but that was many years ago when they were kids. And it wasn't even particularly harsh bullying from what I could tell either. Just teasing and stuff like that. This woman coldly calculated her revenge plan. It's not like he still bullied people later into his school years either. He lives in fear each day now. Fear that she'll somehow find him. He only wants to work part-time, so he's not in the public eye as often. But on the other hand, I guess you could call this somewhat of a karma story. It's a very distressing one, though, and one that I'll never forget. This happened just this summer. My best friend Jonah and I are both in college and are outdoorsy kind of people. We'd go on hikes and sometimes go out camping when we had the chance as well. This year, when classes were out for the summer, we made plans to go camping by a lake that was a couple hours away from us. Now, it would be fair to say we weren't exactly experts at camping, but we also weren't entirely clueless either. We knew what we were doing at least, and didn't stay any longer than what we knew would be safe. We set out on the trail in the morning, prepared for 2 full nights out there. The hike took a bit longer than it was supposed to, but we got to the lake around midday. From what I know, there are hundreds of trails leading to this lake because of how big it is, and there were so many places to camp that it was extremely unlikely to run into anyone else. We didn't want to have to talk to other people, so when we arrived and saw nobody else was there, We were feeling quite good about things. The first hour we just sat down and rested from the long hike. Then we put up our tents in the tree line, just outside range of the beach. By then, the sun was setting, so Jonah got a fire going, and I went out to collect some dry sticks to keep it running. I'd picked up a few not too far from our tents, when I suddenly began to hear a noise from just in front of me. I lifted my eyes and looked ahead. It was getting dark, but I could still see most of the woods. Pretty far back, there looked to be a person or something. After looking for a couple more seconds, I was able to see them distinctly walking and confirmed it was definitely a person out there in the woods. I quickly walked back to the campsite and told Jonah about it. We weren't exactly afraid or anything. It was just a little bit weird for someone to be out here wandering in the exact place we were. I think we also would have had a different feeling if they were just walking along the beach, but instead they were just wandering through the woods, not even on a trail. 15 minutes went by, and the sun had now passed the horizon, covering the woods in darkness. That's when we heard footsteps approaching. A moment later, a man appeared in the light from our campfire. He looked to be in his 30s, with a beard and shoulder-length hair. I immediately got a bad feeling about him. He smiled at us from across the campfire, then asked us if we knew the way to a specific place. I didn't recognize the name of it, but it sounded like a trail's name. "Sorry, we're not too sure where that is," I said. The man kept his smile and looked at us for another moment before turning around and wandering back into the woods. He didn't say anything else. I looked over at Jonah. Both of us were equally mystified and unnerved. After we were sure he was gone, Jonah asked me if that was the same person I'd seen before. I couldn't be 100% sure, but I was fairly confident it was. We spent the rest of that night by the fire, trying to think of reasons the man would be out there like that. The only thing that would make somewhat sense was if he got desperate for help once the sun went down and he was lost or something. But that man didn't seem desperate at all. He asked for directions like everything was normal. He also wouldn't have just left after asking one question, right? Both of us were getting a little freaked out, so we let the conversation die out. Once it was getting closer to bed, we let the fire burn out as well, then climbed into our tents. I tried sleeping, laying there for at least an hour, just listening to the sounds of the woods. There was this weird feeling I was getting, though, that wouldn't let me close my eyes for too long without getting nervous. After somewhere around 2 hours of laying awake, I heard it. Footsteps sneaking towards our tent. I yelled Jonah's name and rushed out of my tent. I looked into the woods. A figure was standing 10 feet from me. A second later, they turned around and sprinted back into the woods, being hidden by the darkness. Jonah came out only in time to hear their footsteps running away. He said he knew exactly what was going on, though. We packed up that night and waited tiredly for dawn to make our way out of those woods. We don't know who that man was or why he was seemingly wandering so far out there with no equipment. If I hadn't stayed awake through the night, we may have never left those woods at all. Not more than a week or two ago, I hiked out on a long trail in the dense woods behind my town. I lived in a really close-knit town with just under 1,000 people, so we were pretty far out from any big populated cities. The woods on the outskirts were very flat, no mountains or hills of any sort, but there were a few ponds and some small rivers running through the middle. I was heading out to one of those rivers. I'd been there before a few times, though I'd never had the chance to camp out there. That was until this day. As I could recall from the previous times, I knew it was about a 3-hour walk almost perfectly north. As I walked between the trees, it was very quiet. aside from the birds and other animals rustling the leaves around me. There were no other people or hikers at all, and I didn't plan on seeing anyone either. This was not even a trail, it was just open woodland. As I was about 45 minutes out from the river, though, I suddenly stumbled into someone. We were both walking toward each other, and it seemed like neither of us had noticed each other until we were just a few feet away, separated by only a few trees. I know I must have had a confused and almost nervous look. I found it really unusual to run into someone off-trail in the middle of the woods like this. The man had just about the same look. I was about to break the silence and offer a hello, but after a second his face shifted into a nervous smile, and he turned to walk off to the side. I followed his lead and kept walking past, but I looked back once I got a bit further away. I saw the man was no longer walking, but was running away now, not making a single sound. When running into each other, it gave me a somewhat unsettling feeling, but seeing him run off like that only made it even stranger. It was like the man did not want to be seen there. Whatever the case, I decided to mind my own business and continued making my way to the river. This was no campsite or anything, obviously, so I just plopped my bag and tent down on the flattest area I could find. Then I went to get a fire going, since the sun was just about to set. I tossed in a bunch of random sticks and twigs that were around, and made sure it would burn for a couple of hours at least. I was hoping to stay up and wait until the stars came out, so I could do some stargazing away from town. I could often get a good view of the Milky Way, which was a sight I never wanted to miss out on. Hours passed by while I was sitting and waiting, until a very distinct sound came to the quiet woods behind me. Footsteps, slow and careful ones. I turned and looked, not making out much in the darkness as I gazed around. The footsteps did stop though, telling me that while I may not see them, they could clearly see me. I reached down for my bag and picked up my heavy-duty flashlight, shining it out into the trees. I could see decently far now, but as I moved it back and forth, I didn't see anyone out there. I felt my heart rate increasing a bit as the unsettling feeling came over me again. "Anyone out there?" I waited for a moment with no response, then tried again. "Hello?" Not even the sound of another footstep. After a moment of contemplation, I started to walk toward where I'd heard the sound from. Maybe there was a chance I was mistaken, but I needed to be sure. I carefully stepped out through the woods, keeping my flashlight steadily pointing ahead. I got to where I thought the sound was coming from. I moved the light to my left, looking behind each tree. Needless to say, I was caught by surprise when the light suddenly revealed a large man in hiding. It was the one I'd run into only a few hours ago. He was no more than 20 feet away, but even with the light now on him, he stood perfectly still. In an act of quick thinking, I tried not to react and continued to move my flashlight across the woods, hoping he might think I didn't see him somehow. I then began walking back to the tent, trying to act as unbothered as possible. I picked up my bag and looked around once more before quickly leaving my tent and campfire behind. I walked into the woods following the river's side. Once I felt I'd made enough distance between us, I started running as far and fast as I could until I was without a doubt away from that man. I found a spot to rest at with a good view and sat there wide awake until sunrise. I don't think the man followed me that far, as I was able to make it out without hearing or seeing the man again. I'm not sure why exactly he was out there, or why he showed up and hid by my campsite at night, but I never went back to retrieve my tent, in fear that I might find out if I did so. It was around this time last year when I decided to use Craigslist as a means to sell a few things. I had to get rid of some stuff. My house was getting pretty cluttered and I planned to get some new furniture. With winter right around the corner, I wanted to get these things out fast. The main piece I was selling were these 2 lounge chairs in my living room. They were really huge and a bit outdated. They were still fully functional though, and didn't have any stains or rips on them. It only took about half a day for a few responses to come in. 2 of the 3 gave me low-ball offers though, so there really was only one guy who was serious about buying them. He wanted to take a look at them after work that day, sometime around 6 or 6:30. I of course agreed. I was just happy to get them out of there quickly. Now, I'd usually try to meet up somewhere public, but honestly, I didn't have a way to transport the chairs, and even if I did, I didn't think I could lift them all by myself. Anyway, I sent him my address and told him to come at 6 o'clock. I turned on the front porch light and opened the curtains on the windows, then sat in the living room on my phone while I waited for this person to show up. Probably 20 minutes passed by before a truck pulled into my driveway. They took a few minutes before getting out and walking up to the front door. I said hello and let him in. He was an average-looking man, late 20s or early 30s, wearing some typical work clothes. His name was Matt, apparently. He started up some small talk, telling me about why he was so excited about getting this furniture. The guy seemed really nice all in all. I felt quite relieved, actually. This would surely be a quick and easy process. He walked around the chair and sat down in it. He seemed to enjoy it, and we talked about the price. He was good to give me what I'd listed it for. Just as we were about to exchange cash, though, we both heard a car door slam shut. It sounded like it was right in the driveway where he'd parked his truck. Matt quickly went outside to check on it, and I just watched, not really sure entirely what was going on. I looked through the window. There were no other cars out there. Someone had to have been messing with his truck. A minute later, Matt came back in. He was clearly angry and said someone had stolen a bunch of things out of his car. I could tell he was not nearly as trusting of me anymore. He clearly thought I had something to do with this. Obviously, I didn't. I said that, but I guess he was right to be skeptical. I was also right to be skeptical of him. I didn't know if this was some sort of setup or anything. Before anything further could be worked out, though, we heard footsteps approaching the front door. We both turned and looked over, only to see a guy in a hood push the door open and step into my house. His eyes were fully bloodshot, and he looked completely insane. His right hand was shoved into his pocket with the outline of a recognizable object inside. He stared at us, standing just a few feet away. He was clearly in a complete state of rage. This guy was young, maybe 18 or 19 years old. It was a dangerous situation. Matt and I both stood there, trying not to provoke anything to happen. Matt told the kid to take it easy and held his hands up and took a step closer. The kid was quick to pull the weapon out of his pocket and aim it right at him. Yes, it could have been fake, but there was no way to really tell. From the way the kid was acting, I don't think it really was. He yelled at Matt to walk out the door. I was in shock. He did as the kid said. The kid then followed him out of the house and held him at gunpoint the whole way to the truck. He had Matt get in the driver's seat, and then the kid got in the back. I watched in horror as he pulled out and drove away. Obviously, this was outside of Matt's will. As soon as they were gone, I called 911. I ran to my car and tried to follow them while describing what was going on to the operator. I soon lost them, though, and I couldn't find any sign of them. Police ran an investigation using the information I had to quickly identify who Matt was and his truck's license plate. Over the next couple of days, I was just waiting for a call. but that call never came. Matt and his truck still never turned up. I feel guilty, like I should have done more, but everything happened so fast, and it all felt so risky. I likely could have lost my life as well. Even in those final moments of the interaction, I didn't know for sure if Matt was in on this and it was some sort of elaborate plan. I don't know what that kid wanted, who he was, or why any of it happened. It's been almost a full year though, and I don't think it's likely we'll be finding anything more out. Recently, there was an Amber Alert, and my daughter was asking me what all the beeping sounds were all about. For those of you who don't know, an Amber Alert is an emergency alert that goes out whenever a child is reported missing. If you receive notifications, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The alert will often give information like the victim's appearance as well as the perpetrators, the location of the abduction, the make and model of vehicle to look out for. My phone started beeping one evening while helping my daughter clean her room. An Amber Alert. I gave her the small rundown and that was that. However, in doing so, it triggered a childhood memory I have, where I believe with all my heart that I was almost taken when I was a kid. To be clear, this isn't a memory that was like lying dormant in my subconscious or something. It's something I've pondered on and off about for years now. I'm a 41-year-old man, by the way. This occurrence happened when I was just a young boy. My guess is around 7 or 8. I can't be sure since it was so long ago. My parents took me to a neighboring city to do some shopping. We lived in a rural town with not much to offer, so from time to time we would head down to the city, about 45 minutes from where we were situated. It just kinda had more to offer, honestly. They would take me up there for school clothes shopping, out to eat because the restaurants were better, and to grab stuff because my mom was a crafter. She really loved to make crafts. It was her thing. There were various different craft stores and a fabric store, and she really liked going to that one. This specific trip we went to a fabric store, Joann's Fabrics to be exact, I believe. It was a pretty large store. As a kid, I guess almost every place seems big, but no kidding, this was a gigantic place. My dad sat out in the car while I went in with my mom. He did that a lot. He wasn't so interested in these things as we were. Can't exactly blame him there. I can't exactly recall what my mom was looking for or trying to buy that day, but I remember we were in an area with a bunch of racks with various fabrics hanging around us. The area was toward the beginning or entrance of the store. As my mom was looking through these various racks, I began to wander around through them, just enough to kind of look around myself, not that far. I was pretty bored, honestly. I could see my mom through the racks just a bit away, so it wasn't like I'd lost her or anything. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a random man approached me. I didn't even see what direction he'd come from. It was almost like I was there by myself 1 minute, and then the next I looked up and this guy appeared out of thin air. He had come in fast and out of nowhere. I looked over to where my mom was. She had moved a fair bit away, but I could still see her. There was a good distance between us at this point. Here I am standing in this maze of fabric with this older guy. He then whispers to me, "Hey there, little boy. How you doing there?" I remained silent because this took me off guard. "Where are your folks at? Are you alone in here?" I stayed quiet and tried to ignore him. "Hey, come here. I got something cool to show you." At this point, he started advancing toward me, slipping through the racks to where I was. I quickly started to go the other way, but he swiftly moved to cut me off at the middle. I was scared. I became instantly aware this man was dangerous, and he was trying to grab me. "Come here," he barked. I jerked to the left, and he did the same. He got this wild look in his eyes. Whichever direction I tried to flee, he moved to cut me off. There was a big rack between us though, and I'm thankful for that. After some back and forth movements from me and the man, I finally locked in on my mom. "Mom, help me!" You would have thought I'd screamed bloody murder. It was so loud it got my mom's attention immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. This obviously startled the man. He looked over my shoulder in the direction of where I was looking and confirmed that my mother really was there. His demeanor immediately changed, as if everything was just fun and games and he had just been messing around. "I was just playing with your boy here. No harm, ma'am." My mom came to where I was, and as we reconnected, the man tipped his hat at my mom and swiftly slipped his way out of the store. I explained to my mom everything that happened. I was so upset and shaken up. She told me I'd done the right thing by yelling and getting attention. It was terrifying for sure, and I'm grateful the man wasn't able to grab me and escape. Could I have been imagining things? Maybe this guy really was just messing around. I don't think so, though. I think very much he had nefarious intentions. Why would a random old guy be perusing the fabric store anyway? And if he was there for something like crafts, why leave immediately when confronted? He truly was up to no good. About a year ago, I was living with one of my mates. I stayed in a ground floor flat that kind of sits in a cul-de-sac and is a bit of a pain to walk to. It's kind of detached from the community. The only times I felt completely safe there were during sunlight hours, depending on the time of year, of course. The block of flats is arranged in an L-like shape. Our entrance sits right inside the 90-degree angle. Inside the main building, there's a flat either side and stairs in front. The immediate entrance hall is very dark. I feel like the lights kinda choose when and when not they feel like working sometimes. The flats are all very basic. A hallway, 2 small double bedrooms, a bathroom, a decent living room, and a small kitchen. The hallway itself is quite long, and the living room is right at the end of it. Both bedrooms face each other, so we could talk to each other from within our doorways. If that makes sense. I'm telling you all this to help you picture the incident. It was around 11 o'clock or 11:30 at night perhaps. My flatmate was in her room, presumably asleep. She had this bad habit of leaving things unlocked every now and then. I always have to get up and make sure everything is locked up before I head off to sleep. But she'd gotten better about it, and normally at least had the chain on the door if she'd forgotten the main lock. She always went to bed pretty early, so I didn't really mind having to do this. I was in the living room and decided to grab a pint of water before heading to bed myself. I went into the kitchen, which was attached to the living room. I switched on the kitchen light and filled up a glass. The car park in front of our flat was very dark, and I remember this eerie feeling coming over me. I couldn't quite say why. I just felt like something was really off here. The kind of feeling you get when you switch the light off and feel the need to run up the stairs. Anyway, I took a couple sips and filled the glass a little more, then went to head out of the kitchen. To my surprise, I heard the front doorbell ring. I froze. I didn't even know we had a doorbell. That tells you how many visitors we usually got. About 10 seconds passed before the letterbox was hit twice and my stomach sank. I felt trapped in the kitchen. Important to note 2 things here. If you step out of the kitchen area, it puts you in perfect line with the hallway if the living room door is open, which it was. And 2, our front door had a bloody window on it, so you could see the silhouettes of anyone outside or in. We did have a cute gray curtain across the front, but it was pretty see-through. I grabbed my phone and called my mate who was in her room, right next to the front door. "Did you hear that?" We were both wondering if we had just imagined it. We had to whisper because the walls were paper thin. You could always hear people coming and going. She crept out to her bedroom doorway, but couldn't go forward because then she'd be in direct sight of the window. I edged my way out of the kitchen, keeping flat against the wall. I sunk down to the floor, texting her now because we were closer to the door. We didn't want whoever was outside to hear us. Another thing you should note is this person must have buzzed other flats to get into the building, because they sure didn't buzz ours. I reckon they must have seen me through the kitchen window. Lying in a kind of army crawl, I could see the silhouette of a tall, bald man. He chapped the letterbox again, but just stood there. Terrified, I mouthed to my mate, "Did you remember to lock the door?" She said no. The chain wasn't on the door either. It was now or never, I supposed. I crawled as low as I could to my bedroom, grabbed my keys, and crawled over to the door. I frantically shoved the keys in and twisted, at the same time putting the chain on. It was a noisy affair, and obviously the man noticed I was there now. As I desperately tried to twist the crappy old-school key into the lock, I finally got it. I was terrified to stand up. My mate poked her head out of her room to see if he wasn't there anymore. She was kind of half-stoned, so she kind of fell asleep and went back to bed. But something was nagging at me, though, really badly. Remember how I said you could easily hear people coming and going? Well, it was really quiet, and not once did either of us hear the building's main door open or close. This was someone who was from our building. We had one person across from us, two people above us, and two above them. Two of those flats were students. Our neighbor was a 98-year-old woman. There was a couple with a short, long-haired, and chill guy, so nobody we knew lived there matched the frame of the man in our flat window. I stayed up until I couldn't anymore, keeping my room door shut and keeping my hockey stick next to my bed. I realized about a month after this that the service button to the front main building was broken, and anybody could come right in if they pressed it. If they were very quiet, you wouldn't even know they had slipped inside. I think the person must have saw me in the kitchen in the light and thought to try their luck that night. It easily could have been a different story had I not managed to lock the door in time. Always lock your doors, heck, double lock even, no matter how safe you reckon your area is. We have no idea to this day who that man was, nor why he was there. Obviously, we never saw him again, and we never heard anyone use our doorbell again. I had a terrifying experience last year. I live alone in a smaller house, and I've been living there for about 3 years now. It has 2 bedrooms and just 1 bathroom, but that's enough space for me. I also have a somewhat small front yard and a fenced-in backyard as well. One Friday night, I got home from work a little bit early. I didn't really have anything going on that night, but I was going to hang out with some friends the following day. Because of this, I decided to do all my chores right now and not have to deal with them later. There was a lot of stuff I had to do throughout the week, but some of that I would just leave for the weekends, like doing laundry or vacuuming the carpet, etc. After getting home, I started doing all that stuff. I did the laundry, I vacuumed, I cleaned up the bathroom. I also organized a few things. It surprisingly didn't take me all that long. I'd finished basically everything. I was going to cook some food for myself. I remember I had this recipe I had saved on my phone, and I was really excited to try it. When I went to go try, though, I realized that I couldn't find my phone anywhere. Obviously, I didn't have it on me when I was cleaning. Usually I would just leave it on the coffee table in the living room, or sometimes on the couch playing music or something. When I looked in both of those places, I couldn't find it. I wasn't too worried until I searched the entire kitchen and it wasn't there either. I went into the bathroom, my bedroom. I knew it wouldn't be there probably, but I looked everywhere anyways. After not finding it anywhere, I wondered if I'd lost it somewhere at work or something. As I thought back and tried to retrace my steps, I remembered that I had my phone on me shortly after arriving back at my house. I had sent a message to one of my friends about tomorrow, so I knew that it had to be around in here somewhere. I took all the cushions off my couch, wasn't there either. I basically turned the entire place upside down, but I couldn't locate my phone anywhere. This puzzled me greatly. I didn't have a house phone or any other sort of phone, so I couldn't call it to see where it was. The last place I decided to look was the basement. I had an unfinished basement which I really never used. There were all kinds of pipes and beams and all sorts of things sticking out down there. I also stored several large boxes and other items. I did keep my vacuum down there next to the base of the stairs. I had only gone down there for a moment earlier to grab the vacuum and pull it back up, but maybe on some slim, crazy chance, it had fallen out of my pocket or something after I forgot it. I mean, I looked everywhere else. I didn't know where else it could be. I turned on the light and started to head down the stairs. The light didn't do a whole lot, though. All it did was light up one measly bulb near the base of the stairs. After walking down, I looked on the floor near the vacuum, but I didn't see anything. I was about to turn around and head back upstairs when I heard a strange noise. I thought I could make out some movement out of the corner of my eye as well. It was out of sight and in a dark area of the basement, so I couldn't quite be sure. I stopped and tried to look in the direction of what I thought I saw, and I observed a bit closer. That's when a man started to come into view. He was hiding behind a large box. He looked really creepy, and I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. He was a ways away. I was so shocked for a second or two that I didn't know how to react. The man stood up from behind his hiding place and actually started to move toward me. I turned and bolted up the stairs, like my life depended on it. For all I knew, it might have. I made it to the top and left my basement, then slammed the door shut behind me. I ran for my front door and didn't stop until I made it all the way outside. During this, I didn't think at all. It was really all just instinctual reaction. I just wanted to get out of my house. After leaving, I realized I hadn't grabbed my keys or anything. I obviously didn't have my phone either, so I couldn't call the police. Now I couldn't get into my car either. I didn't exactly want to go back inside and grab it, so instead I ran to a neighbor's house. I didn't go next door because I thought the guy might run outside after me, so instead I ran several doors down and knocked on the front door of that house. I didn't know who lived there, but I hoped they would be kind enough to answer. After about 30 seconds, they did. I asked them to call the police and told them what was happening. They agreed to call, and we waited on their front step together. We watched the direction of my house, but saw no signs of anybody trying to leave. I wasn't sure if the guy had already left, or if he was still inside somewhere skulking about. The police were really quick to respond, though, and got there within less than 2 minutes. I went back over with my neighbor and met an officer there. The police then entered my home. A while later, they came out with the same man I had seen in my basement. He had still been in the house. In fact, he'd gone back down to the basement to hide. When they pulled him out, they discovered he had my cell phone in his pocket. I was able to get my phone back, but obviously the whole thing really creeped me out a lot. I'm not sure when or how he managed to grab my phone. The only thing I can think of is that he must have already been inside my house when I got back from work. He must have come upstairs without me noticing, grabbed my phone, and went back down. How he got into my house, or when he got in, I have no idea. Maybe I was so tired I forgot to lock my front door, or maybe he entered through a window or something. There were no signs of a break-in from what I could tell. Either way, since that experience, I bought a lot of security cameras, and I always double-check to make sure everything is locked. I'm 26 years old, and this year I settled on a house. I'd been living with my roommates for the past 8 years or so. Seclusion is something I really value, so finally buying a home all for myself was a big accomplishment for me. It was in a neighboring town, about 2 hours out from where I used to live. This town was much smaller in scale and had far fewer buildings. That's not to say that every house was on a farm or anything like that. The neighborhoods were definitely not full of close-together rows of houses like a suburb or something, though. They were spread out and separated by fields of trees and grasslands. The home I bought was no exception. It was modest and amongst the less expensive side of the housing market in this area. It was out in a forest a few miles away from the market center in town. On the day I moved in, I still hadn't met anyone in the area, not the neighbors nor the townspeople, and with the house being so far out with trees blocking the surrounding view, it kind of felt like I was moving out into the middle of nowhere, completely alone. Saying it like that makes it sound more eerie than it really felt at the time, but it wasn't all that comforting of a thought either. I had a rental van for the day, so I got to work right away unloading my things into the house. I wanted to be as quick as possible. I tried to put pretty much everything right in the living room, rather than sorting it as I went. This took a few hours, and the sun was swiftly going down. Just as I finished up, it was about ready to set. I set down a few boxes in the home and started walking out to the driveway for the last few things inside. I was caught off guard to see a man standing on my porch, almost blocking the entire front door. He really startled me, making me jump in surprise before showing a bit of embarrassment. I asked what the man was there for. The man looked to be about 50 or so. He smiled and introduced himself as my new neighbor. I said it was nice to meet him and gave him a polite smile. I couldn't help but think about how I'd never seen him walking up the driveway to my home. In fact, I had no idea where he'd come from, given it was just forest around my house. The man stayed there just kind of looking at me for a second, then turned and walked off my porch. I stood there and soaked in the strangeness of that encounter. After a moment, though, I stepped back outside and quickly got the rest of the boxes into the home. I peeked out the windows to make sure the man was actually gone. I didn't see him anywhere around. After a minute, I went out and got into the van, driving it down the long dirt driveway. It had only been a couple of minutes since the man had left, yet I didn't see him anywhere as I drove down the main road. There were no other paths I was aware of, so this made me a lot more uneasy. Anyway, I returned the van and hopped a local taxi back home, then started in on the unpacking. I wasn't working that fast. I was already tired and it was pretty late. I wanted to get some furniture put together before calling it a night. I grabbed the pieces to my bed frame and lugged them into my bedroom, beginning to piece it together. Right as I was figuring it out, a sudden knock interrupted me. I stopped and listened in to see if there would be any further sounds. I got up and quietly walked to the front door. I kept the door shut and locked, but looked out the peephole. I saw the exact same man from earlier during the day, but this time there was something wrong with him, more so than before even. He was shaking his head, moving around in an unnatural way. His eyes were fixated on the doorknob. He was staring at it so intensely it was like he was trying to burn a hole through it. He was standing quite close to the door as well, as if waiting for me to open it. "Hey, it's your neighbor! Can you open the door?" he yelled. Then he knocked again. I still remained on the other side, looking through the peephole. When I didn't answer, his face began to show frustration and anger. He banged on the door one more time, then turned and faced the pitch-black forest. He looked out into the darkness and held his hand up. He did some sort of motion, followed by him running out into the forest in the direction he'd waved at. Terrified, I immediately called the police. It was too late for them to find and question the man, though. After that night, I never saw him again. Even to this day, now that I've met all my neighbors, of course none of them were that man. And none of my neighbors knew who he could possibly be either. In fact, nobody in the entire town seemed to recognize him, at least not from my description. I don't know who the man was signaling to in the forest, or even how many people could have been out there waiting for the man to gain my trust and get me to open the door. What would have happened afterwards, I believe, is best left unthought of. Me and a good friend of mine, Zach, were going together to a mutual friend's wedding in Wyoming. They'd chosen to get married in the same small town they grew up in, which was somewhat inconvenient for everyone else. But who am I to say? It's their wedding after all. Zach and I found a nice Airbnb nearby and took his car across a few states to the middle of Wyoming. This town was mostly made up of farms with a small central area for groceries, food, and some small businesses. On the outskirts, we'd found this Airbnb. It was a farmhouse as we'd expected, but it had so much land around it that we didn't expect. The home was almost entirely isolated from everywhere else. Looking off in any one direction, the only things visible would be grass, trees, and the dirt road that led here. We unloaded and unpacked all our luggage inside. It was nice. I wouldn't compliment its looks too much, but it was great for a couple nights' stay. Zach and I spent the rest of the day just kinda hanging out and talking, going to bed by 11 o'clock or so. I took a while to fall asleep. I think it was because the house was so far out. It just made me feel kind of uneasy, you know? Once I did fall asleep, though, I slept pretty deeply. In the morning, we went to the wedding and spent the entire day there, not getting back to the Airbnb until at least 9 or 10. Zach went to bed right away, but I stayed in the living room to relax for a little bit longer. It was only 10 minutes after settling in, though, that a single quiet knock came from the front door. I got up and was feeling very strange. Why would someone be out here this late at night? I quietly walked over to the door and looked to see who it was, but when I checked, I didn't see anyone out there. I opened the door and stuck my head out a bit, looking all around the driveway. Everything was empty as far as the eye could see. There was nobody outside, it seemed. After a few moments of confusion, I shut the door once more. I looked over at Zach's room. I knew he must have already been passed out, so he probably hadn't even heard it at all. I assumed it must have just been a noise from the house that simply resembled the knock. It was a quiet sound, after all. Everything pointed to it being nothing. I sat back down to continue resting, but not even a minute after sitting, a quiet noise knocked from the outside of the house. This time, though, it was from the other side of the home entirely. I quickly got up and rushed over to the back, turning on the outdoor light. I looked out the window, but again there was nothing. This furthered the idea that it was just the house making these noises, but it still didn't take away from the unsettling nature of it all. I stayed by the window for a while. It had been about 5 minutes, looking out into the backyard that led to the forest. It was pitch black outside. I was hoping that by seeing nothing was out there, I'd be less on edge, but actually it only unsettled me even further. There was just something about being out here in someone else's farmhouse that gave me an uncomfortable feeling. I stayed up for a while longer, wanting to be sure nothing else was going on. I decided to try my hand at getting some sleep finally. I went to my room, which was across the hall from Zach's, and laid down in bed. I didn't hear anything else, so I slowly drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, my eyes shot open immediately. Someone was knocking on my bedroom door. "Hello? Zach?" To my relief, I heard Zach's voice from the hall, asking me to come out for a moment. I got up and met him in the hallway. From just one look at him, though, I knew something was wrong here. He looked terrified and worried. "What's wrong? What's going on?" I asked. He explained that he'd woken up to something moving around outside his window, and when he moved the curtains back, he saw the backside of a man walking around the house. As we were discussing the situation, clicking sounds began coming from the front door. Both of us ran over to the living room. A man was out on the porch, standing with his body right up against the door. He was clearly fidgeting with something, which made me sure he was trying to pick the lock. I turned and looked at Zach in fear. I think he knew exactly what was going on without me having to say anything. He ran to his room and called the police, while I stayed and made sure this guy didn't get in. The only thing I could really do, though, was hold the lock and hope he wouldn't disable it somehow. I could hear the man outside getting frustrated. All of a sudden, he just ran off to the side of the house. Both of us were too scared to check the windows and opted instead for locking ourselves in one of the rooms and waiting for the cops to arrive. If I'm being honest, though, the rest of what happened was very uneventful. The cops pulled in a long while later, gathering basically no evidence and never getting any idea on what happened that night. I don't know who that guy was or why he was trying to break into the Airbnb, but if those noises I heard earlier in the night were from him, then he had been skulking about the house for several hours and knew that he was breaking into an occupied home. That only makes the whole encounter even more terrifying. I live in a really small countryside town. The population's only a few thousand, and the nearest city is a couple hours away. Most of the people that live here are quite close. With there being so few people around, everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew everything that was going on in town as well. At the time, I was in high school and had a best friend named Chris that I'd hang out with pretty much every day. During mid-fall, there was a lot of talk about this empty farmhouse in the town that people were keen on exploring. I was never one to do those sorts of things, but Chris was, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't the least bit curious. Supposedly, this farmhouse had been left behind by the owners years ago. Left to rot on the edge of town for the past 5 years. Being in high school, the rumors of it spread like wildfire. People were telling stories about it, daring others to explore it. It was on one weekend night that Chris brought it up to me as well. We had nothing else to do, really, and Chris seemed really excited to see what everyone was talking about. After finding a couple flashlights, we got in the car and drove to the farmhouse. We only knew which road it was on, but it wasn't very hard to find from the road. You could see the rotting house in the distance. We couldn't find the driveway up to it, though. It was likely it had long since been overgrown, might not even exist anymore. We parked on the road and started walking through the field towards this house. It was almost 1 a.m., so the moon was lighting up the field just enough for us to navigate through. As we got closer, it almost felt like the night got quieter and quieter around us until we reached its area. The house had weeds infesting the whole yard, and vines growing through the wooden panels on the outside. Chris led the way, walking around to the front where the door was missing. That gave us easy enough access inside. We stepped in and started walking through the rooms, looking at the trash on the ground and the decaying interior. It made both of us wonder why it had been abandoned to begin with. After a minute or two, though, we'd seen everything on the first floor. We moved up to the second. It was much darker upstairs. There were no windows to let in the moonlight. We both turned on our flashlights and shined them around. There were only 2 rooms up there, one on the left side of the hallway and the other on the right side. Chris went up to the left, finding that the door was locked. While he was struggling with that door, I went over to the other room. It happened to be unlocked. It was entirely empty, having mold covering the ceiling and nothing more. There was a single window with slabs of wood nailed across it. Curious, I went up to it. Why would they need to block an upstairs window? I crouched down to investigate and looked in between the 2 slabs to see what was outside. Maybe it had access to the roof or something. It didn't, though. This was just an ordinary window facing the field we'd come from. As I looked out into the moonlit grass, I saw a figure walking toward the farmhouse, not too far away. I left the window and whispered to Chris that someone was coming. My heartbeat was already speeding up. I think it was seeing the figure being all alone that really freaked me out, though. Knowing this was not another group of kids just exploring this place. Chris looked nervous too. He walked over to the window to see for himself, but we immediately stopped at the sound of footsteps entering the house downstairs. We froze in place, standing in the middle of the empty room, too scared to even take a step and risk being found. The person walked slowly through the first floor, going to the stairs and beginning to walk up. Both Chris and I stared at the open doorway, listening as the footsteps approached the top. They started coming even closer, until the large figure of a man appeared in front of us. He was facing the other way, unlocking the locked door. As he stood in that dark hallway just 4 or 5 feet away from us, I held my breath in my hands, hoping he would not turn around. When he opened the door, I immediately locked eyes with another man who had been waiting inside that room. Our gaze was broken as the man went into the room and closed the door behind him. We heard them whispering immediately after. Chris and I made our move, sprinting into the hallway and down the stairs. We heard the door swing open and footsteps charging out behind us. We fled the house and ran for the field. We didn't stop until we got to the car, driving away as fast as we could. The whole ride back to my house, neither of us said a single word. We were both just in shock, taking everything in. We had no idea what was going on in that house or who those men were, but out of fear of getting in trouble for trespassing, we did not call the police. We were stupid to have even gone there in the first place. I won't defend any of my actions, but I feel like there was something more sinister going on at that farmhouse. A month after that incident, the house was bought and torn down with no reason given. Whether or not something was really going on in there, we'll never be able to find out now, that's for sure. This story takes place when I went to Yellowstone National Park with some friends. Obviously, the park is massive, and there are hiking trails that you can go on. That's what my group was going to be doing on the day this story took place. We spent a total of 3 days in the area beforehand, and this was the final day there. There were 7 of us total, so a decent group of people. We started hiking on one of the trails. I don't recall exactly which one it was, but it went through a lot of woods and by some streams and things like that. It was one of the best trails that I've ever been on, and I was really enjoying the experience. My group soon got really split up though. Everybody was kind of going at their own pace. Some people would stay back and look at something, while others kept on walking further ahead. I was one of the people that found myself getting caught in the back for a while. It was just me and 2 other people, with all of the others out of sight. We didn't think too much of it though. At one point, I stopped to observe a stream. I thought that the other 2 were also stopping with me and looking at something, but I soon realized they didn't stop at all. They just kept on walking, so now I was all by myself at the very back. Still, that wasn't that big of a deal. I thought I could catch right back up to them easily. I started walking on the path again, and walked at a faster pace so I would catch up with them. After the stream, the trail went through a more dense patch of woods. It was not that long into that portion when I heard a strange noise up ahead. I couldn't be sure exactly what it was. Needless to say, I was very surprised when a woman suddenly emerged from the woods. I was confused by this. I didn't recognize her at all, and she was obviously not one of our group. She walked out kind of in front of me, and then asked me if I could help her with something. I asked her what was going on. She said that her friend needed some help, and then told me to follow her. She started walking back into the woods. I noticed she was following a very small trail leading deeper in. It didn't look like any kind of real trailhead. It was either an animal trail or had been caused by the woman walking back there. I didn't know what the situation was with her friend needing help, but I followed her out into the woods. It was pretty thick in there. We were going over rocks and tall grass. The visibility was not good at all. I kept following her, farther and farther into these woods. This went on for close to 5 minutes. I couldn't believe how far in we were going. It made me wonder why she was so far back here in the first place. Finally, we came upon a tiny clearing. The woman entered it, and I was about to as well. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, though. There were 2 large men standing at the sides. They were wearing old white hockey goalie masks, the creepy-looking ones. That was enough to make me instantly turn around and start running back. There was no friend needing help that I could see, or anything of the sort. Just 2 men laying in wait in masks. I didn't even think about it. I was just running as fast as I could. I was getting smacked by tree branches, scraping myself on rocks. I could hear somebody running after me. This caused me to go even faster. I'm not sure who was chasing me. If it was one of them or all of them. Nobody was saying anything. We were just running for a while. I didn't stop, and luckily I was in pretty good shape. I run daily for exercise, so I was able to not have to stop at all until I got back to the regular trail. By that point, I didn't really hear them still chasing after me. When I made it back to the trail, I ran in the direction my friends had gone. Just moments later, I saw one of them coming back in my direction. My friend had been looking all over for me and asked what was going on. I told her to keep moving, and we both jogged for a while. When I was absolutely sure we were not being chased or followed, I slowed down and told her the whole story. We decided to report it to the park rangers, but the phone signal was kind of going in and out. It took a while before we could get contact with them. We later caught up with the rest of the group, and I didn't let them out of my sight after that. For the rest of my time at Yellowstone, I didn't see those strangers again. I don't know exactly what was going on there. I'm hoping it was nothing too serious, but I don't really have an explanation for what happened. Back in the early 2000s, the old elementary school sat abandoned at the edge of my hometown for months before renovations began. And by renovations, I mean completely tearing the whole thing down and building a new school on top of its corpse. Kind of a morbid metaphor for an elementary school, but it's the most accurate one. Now, something I've got to confess, it was my old elementary school. I was a little bit sad and mad they were going to tear it down. After all, I graduated from there and moved on to middle school. In the summer between 6th and 7th grade, I made a plan with my good buddy Troy to have one last expedition to our old haunt. We already knew that was illegal, okay, so don't feel the need to lecture me about it now. The plan was simple: sneak into the school at night and explore every inch of the place, especially the nooks and crannies we weren't allowed to go when it was open, like the teacher's lounge and the kitchen. Troy told me he wanted to see if he could nab some leftover desserts from the freezer. I was pretty sure they had already cleared everything out, and even if they hadn't, I wasn't sure it would be safe to eat. But I wasn't about to crush his little dreams. I wanted to see what happened behind the scenes in the office. Kind of lame, I know. Pretty soon, the first few weeks of summer flew right by, and the night of the plan finally came at the end of June. Being the sneaky 12-year-olds we were, we said we were planning on spending the night at each other's houses, but instead met up at the local gas station just down the street from the school. The building loomed as large as a mountain on the horizon to us. It was familiar, but also alien feeling. With our hearts pounding, we ran with each other to the edge of the playground. The entire school was surrounded by a very short chain-link fence that me and Troy used to climb all the time, so it was no sweat getting over it now. We played on the swings, the rope climbing thing, and the jungle gym, just like we did in the good old days. Which, were only a couple of months ago, but whatever. Troy did a few fancy flips and jumps off the swing, while I went head first down all the slides. Basically anything we'd normally get in trouble for at recess. I still remember the cold metal ridges catching my shirt and sliding over my stomach as I hurled to the ground over and over. Eventually, though, we got bored of the kiddie playground stuff and started searching for a way inside the school. Obviously, the doors were locked, so we started messing with the first floor windows. Looking to see if there were any other way inside. Eventually, I picked up a rock to break one, but Troy quickly stopped me. He said we didn't want to get in too much trouble if we were caught. On second thought, neither of us wanted to crawl in through broken glass either. We soon found that we didn't need to force our way in anyway. A window had been left open after all. One leading right into the library. The space behind the window was nearly pitch black, except for the tiny reflections of moonlight off of book jackets along a shelf. Neither of us moved for a moment. In all our plan-making, our tiny minds never thought the inside of our old school would be so creepy when it was empty. Neither of us thought it would take much gusto to take the first step inside, but there we were, frozen in front of the open window. For the first time, I really thought of just how much trouble we'd be in if someone caught us going in. I pictured a spotlight turned on us and police cruisers pulling up in full force. I know that's kind of irrational for something so minor as trespassing kids, but that's just how kids are when they're young. It was exactly that fear that broke the trance and pushed me to start climbing through the window. And Troy tried to say something, but since I was already halfway in, he knew there was no going back. He kept quiet as he followed behind me. The windowsill was very dusty under my hands. The library carpet sent a cluster of dust right into my face. Who knew just how dirty a place could get after a month of disrepair? I heard Troy cough behind me, and I said sorry. Our voices echoed throughout the quiet library. We looked over the library quickly. That wasn't our main goal anyway. We headed out into the darkened hallway. Troy turned on his flashlight once he was sure there was no one milling about. The rows of lockers lit up in the darkness kind of looked like a setting in a horror movie, honestly. I kind of wanted to test and see if my old combination for my lock worked, but Troy punched my arm and challenged me to another race to the cafeteria. We ran down the empty hall. It was so freeing, being able to do all this on school grounds with no teachers to stop us. The cafeteria doors were wide open. Troy grabbed the door frame as he swung into the room. When I reached him, he was dead quiet though. I stopped to catch my breath, but he didn't brag or even say anything like usual. I finally looked at him to ask what was wrong. My mouth dried up when I saw his face. He looked paler than normal, and his mouth was opening and closing like a fish. I asked him what was wrong. He just pointed his flashlight toward one of the lunch tables. I was not prepared to see someone squatting down behind one and staring at us with these insanely crazy eyes. I didn't stick around to get any more details. I could see the guy was older and was holding some sort of syringe. I screamed as he stood up, and we both started to run. I'm not proud to say this, but I nearly shoved Troy to the ground to get out faster. Picture two 12-year-old boys swan diving out an open window, and from there booking it back to Troy's house. That's how scared we were of that guy. We spent the next few days talking everything over. The old guy was probably just a squatter of some sort, and didn't plan on hurting us, but we couldn't entirely be sure. He really looked crazy. We sure as heck didn't want to tell anyone and get in trouble, so we resolved to leave the whole situation behind us. I don't know if the delay in renovations was due to problems with people squatting inside the school, but I can imagine there's a good chance it was part of the problem. I never went back, not even to visit the new school when it was up and running. I lived in the same house for my entire life, all the way from childhood through high school, and even most of college as well. When I moved out during my last year of school, it was really weird to be in a different place all of a sudden. I'd rented out an extremely small single-bedroom house, all the way on the other side of town. Even though the change of environment was different for me, I still really liked it. On day one, I got a van and moved all my stuff into the new place. I didn't unpack really at all. I just set all the boxes down in the main room and chilled out for the rest of the night. The whole process of finding a place, contacting the owners, signing papers, all of it just left me exhausted, and it felt good to be done with all the hard parts of it. I hooked up the TV and stood it up on a few sturdy boxes, then turned on a show to watch. It was probably around 7 o'clock, so it was still too early for bed. As I sat there and watched with half-open eyes, at some point I began hearing two people talking outside. I lowered the volume on the TV and listened in. It sounded like they were right outside my home, but they were whispering and talking extremely quietly. Whatever they were saying, it was too hard to make out. I got up and walked over to one of the windows, pulling the curtain back a little. As soon as I did, a figure moved past it from the outside. I jumped back a bit, getting startled by them being so close. Suddenly, the voices stopped speaking altogether. Now, though, I could hear a set of footsteps quickly going around the house, and then that stopped too. Just like that, it was completely silent once again. I checked a few more windows before getting back to the couch and continuing on with my show. I was certain I was just being paranoid about living alone for the first time, in a brand new environment. I knew the neighbors' houses were really close by, so I assumed it must have something to do with one of them. I sat there for a while with nothing else happening, and eventually laid down. I was starting to get pretty sleepy, dozing off at around 10 o'clock. When I woke up, the house was completely dark, with the only light coming from the TV screen. I looked at my phone and saw it was 2 a.m. I shut down the TV and laid back down, but just as I was about to close my eyes, a soft creak echoed through the floorboards from somewhere across the room. I immediately shifted my eyes toward that sound. In the doorway across the hall, a figure was staring at me. His eyes were wide open, peering at me with half of his body behind the doorframe. My eyes locked onto them, and for the longest few seconds of my life, we were in a stalemate. All of a sudden, they sprinted out of the doorway and down the unlit hallway. Immediately after, another set of footsteps on the other side of the house ran in the same direction. There were a few soft thuds, then silence. The house was still fully dark, making the entire thing that much more terrifying. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I was in an odd state of panic while being frozen in place as well. Once I managed to collect myself, I dialed 911. I told them what happened in between my shaky breaths. While still on the line with the officer, I got up and turned on the light. All throughout the hallway were scuffed shoe prints, going up and down multiple times. When I turned around and looked back at the living room where I had been sleeping, all over the carpet were those same dirty shoe prints, some even within a few feet of where I'd been sleeping. When the cops showed up, they searched around and took a few samples, but they didn't really get any hard evidence. Even more unnerving though, they still weren't exactly sure how the intruders got inside the house, or outside. I told them about the strange thuds I'd heard from the back of the house, but the windows and door in that area of the home were all still locked. I don't know if they had some way of unlocking and locking them from the outside, but surely that had to be it. While the amount of shoe prints showed they had likely been inside for a long time, going through each room multiple times over, they never actually stole anything. They didn't show any signs of wanting to harm me either. They easily could have while I was sleeping. It all just horrifies me to even think about why they broke in then. Maybe they were looking for someone else. Whatever the case, it's been over 2 years now, and they never came back. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.